Check, check. Check 1, 2. I hope audio is coming through. Yeah, looks like it. Okay, I'm just gonna do a repo check. Okay, everything looks good. Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna keep this one a bit short. I'm not gonna go into other things yet because I do want to address a couple more things regarding the drums. Because honestly, the mix is in a really good place, even without having to touch any of the other stuff. And from here on, it's just kind of you can have fun with the mix. Um, so what's happening with why is it that once I've mixed the drums, suddenly the whole mix sounds so drastically different? Well, one of the and this is not a question I pose to you knowing the answer beforehand, right? Although it may have seemed that way, I actually had no idea either. I just went in the previous mix. I was like, okay, I'm going to mess with the drums. I'm going to mix it because that's what you wanted to look at first. Um, and again, it's kind of counterintuitive to how I work, but it turned out really great for this mix. And as I was thinking about it, I realized why it makes such a big difference to the mix. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna listen to all the instruments without the drums. Okay, and I want you to just pay attention to the depth of the mix, and by depth I mean what's in the foreground, what's in the background, and how much of that illusion exists in the mix, right? So the feeling of a deep mix only comes when you have something that's in the foreground and you have something that's very distant. So maybe you have a very dry upfront acoustic guitar or something like that, and you have a very wet, very reverberant vocal all the way in the back. That will create an illusion of depth if you do that. If you have the vocal without any reverb and it's upfront along with the guitar, then you don't have that illusion of depth. So that's a sort of a simplistic explanation of what's going on over there. So we're looking for depth and we're looking for height. All right. And when I say height, I mean, imagine your speaker in front of you, and your speaker has two components. It has the tweeter on top and it has the woofer on the bottom. Now, higher frequencies like cymbals and hi-hats, they're going to excite the tweeter, and lower frequencies, basses, snares, kick drums, things like that, they're going to excite the sub. And of course, I mean the woofer, and of course, other components like vocals and all of that stuff will primarily be in that range as well. So when I say height, I mean what is the balance in distribution between low and high frequencies in your mix. And if you have a very nice, even, pleasant distribution and it goes all the way to the ultra high frequencies, starting from the very, very low frequencies, and there's a wonderful balance there throughout the mix, and it's not too much, it's not too fatiguing, your mix has very good height. It's a tall mix. Okay, that's what I mean. If your mix does not have a lot of high frequencies, then it's a short mix because you're only going to be firing your speaker cone and you're not going to be hitting a tweeter. So think about it like that. Just visualize a speaker in front of you and think about which component is being, affected the most, and that is height. So width, depth, and height are things that drums, okay, coincidentally, they occupy all those spheres in a very big way, right? Drums have all the height, starting from the lowest of low frequencies to the highest of high frequencies. They have plenty of depth because you have room mics on a drum kit, you have different instruments that are at different volumes. So the drum kit itself has like sort of micro depth, and within the mix it has, you place it somewhere. And it also has width. With your overheads, you have a stereo component to your drum mix, which can make it really wide depending on how you're mixing it. So it has all of these things, and if you get these things right, it sort of defines the area of your mix. This is my understanding of it. So let's just listen to the mix without the drums, okay, and listen to the height, the depth, and the width of the mix.
I take the fortune and fame. Don't need the critics' acclaim. At the end of the day, the girls went out.
So right now, our depth is coming from the mid-range instruments. Vocals are up front, guitars in the back, piano in the back, bass all the way in the back, right? Or rather the mid-range of the bass. So that's kind of our depth, and they're all mid-range instruments. They don't have a lot of crazy tonal texture to them, and they're not very transient either. So there isn't a great deal of depth here, which of course we can improve with our mixing, but it's okay. It works. It's not very obvious, right? It still all feels like they're kind of very close to each other depth-wise. Height-wise, again, you don't have a lot of high frequencies. You have a wonderful low end from the bass guitar and from the keyboard as well, but you don't have a lot of high, so it's kind of short. And width-wise, again, I mean, I could pan things out a lot more and make this super wide sounding, but for my taste, I've kept it narrow, so it's a bit narrower than it would be when I throw the drums in. So now I'm going to do is I'm just going to play this again, and then I'm going to play it with the drums. And I want you to pay attention to the width, the height, and the depth of the mix, and how that changes when the drums come in.
I take the fortune and fame. Don't need the critics' acclaim. At the end of the day, the girls went out one. I take the fortune and fame. Don't need the critics' acclaim. At the end of the day, the girls went out one.
So the second the drums came in, it felt like the mix was alive. It had a lot of brightness to it. It had a lot more air to it, which we didn't have prior to that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to listen to only the high end. Okay, we'll just listen to this component in the mix without any other, without the drums, and then with the drums. And we'll see what's happening in that region, okay? This is without any of the drums. I'm going to turn this up a little bit. Let's throw the drums in. So you see how much high end the drums are bringing into that. I'm not even using the analyzer, and you can hear it. Without the drums, with the drums, right? So the analyzer doesn't tell you a great deal about that. It kind of looks the same with or without the drums. So which is, again, don't rely on analyzer. They're just sort of there to poke and prod at the mix. Always let your ears judge. So there's an insane amount of high end that's being added with the drums. So that's the number one thing that's giving the mix the illusion of height, which you just don't have without the drums. And the other thing is not so much depth as it is more like, it's more like density, right? So what's happening is, before, with the drums, with the unprocessed drums, we have we have this sound which is very dull and muted, but it's obviously a good recording and it has all those high frequencies that we just need to bring out. But because it has that, it doesn't have those high frequencies. It's sort of very behind in the mix.
I take the fortune and fame. Don't need the critics to
So we have like this almost concave thing happening, or sorry, convex thing happening, where we have the vocals in the front and then behind the vocals we have the guitars and all that stuff, and that's one shape, and then somewhere in the distance there are some drums. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to bring the drums to the forefront a little bit more by brightening things up.
I take the fortune and fame. Don't need the critics' acclaim.
So now the snare is almost like where the vocals are in terms of depth if you listen to it.
I take the fortune and fame. Don't need the critics' acclaim.
It's like the snare drum is right next to the singer.
I take the fortune and fame.
Right, so we're messing with depth a lot, messing with height a lot. We're just making the mix much more exciting. And because we've brought the drums to the forefront, because we've sort of, brightened things up, made things more prominent, we're also adding to the illusion of width, because our brain is able to hear the width of the drums by adding to that with the
I take the fortune and fame.
process.
Don't need the critics' acclaim. At the end of the day, it goes what I want. I take the fortune and
So that's really it. That's all that's happening with these drums, is that we're adding width, we're adding height, we're adding depth, and that is further accentuating those elements in the mix. And also keep in mind, we're adding it to things that don't have it. That's very, very important. It's not like the mix has a ton of high end and we're adding drums and it's getting even more high. No, it's pretty rolled off, right? So at this point, what we'd want to do is if we're adding top end, like the drums are the upper limit. We don't want to brighten things up more than the drums in the high end. So with the vocals and things like that, yeah, I will be doing some processing to it, but I kind of have a general idea of where I want things to be, and I don't need to work on it too much because it already sounds good. And I've processed the drums quite a bit to get to that point. So I'll have to do a lot less here in terms of brightening things and all that stuff to achieve the right pockets I want for everything to sit. I want everything to sit nicely in its own space. I want to, and again, these are personal tastes. You can choose to have whatever concept you want in the mix, but I want this mix to sound like I'm in the room with the band as much as possible. So I'm going to sort of work on that aesthetic as I keep progressing down the line. But really, this is all that's happening. We are drawing our ears to content in the mix that isn't there. Okay, so that's a frequency thing. The other thing is, of course, a rhythmic element, a musical thing, which you want to think about with your musician hat on and not your mix engineer hat on, right? So without the drums, of course, there is no driving groove.
I take the fortune and fame. Don't need
It is implied, of course, but with the drums, it sort of beats you over the head and it just makes it more exciting because that groove is now realized.
I take the fortune
And there's that backbeat on the ride,
I take the fortune.
which you don't have.
I take the fortune.
You just don't have the backbeat. There's nothing drawing your ear to the backbeat, but with the drums in, that ride is really drawing you
I
in.
take the fortune and fame. Don't need the
Making it nice and groovy.
acclaim.
That's it. That's all it is. It's just that backbeat. That's the special thing. Special sauce in that groove. Nothing fancy. And a nice kick snare. That's really pinning the mix down. Which, of course, this is version 1 of the mix. There'll be a lot more work to do to get it up to spec. But if your starting point looks and sounds kind of like this, you're in a very, very good place. And ideally, also keep in mind when you do your first draft of a mix, try to keep the plugin count, the processing count, as much as possible. Try to keep it low. All right. And this is not a philosophy or anything like that. It's just a practical suggestion, because when you're in this state where you're like, you haven't, applied your trims to your faders and all that stuff, you want to be able to make changes quickly. But if you have this massive plugin chain where you need to go through like a dozen plugins and all that to figure out what's happened, like I can just look at this like a week later and I know exactly what's happening in this mix, right? But if you can't figure that out and you need to go through dozens of plugins just to make a small tweak, then you're not. It's not a very good place to be at this point, right? I'm not trying to dissuade you from using a lot of processing. Please, by all means, be as creative as you want. Use 20 plugins on something if it sounds good. It doesn't really matter how you achieve your goals as long as you do. Um, but having said that, in this initial stage, try to keep it familiar, try to keep it simple, try to keep it dynamic and fluid in such a way where you can just change things up and move and keep moving and keep moving and keep making small iterations to it until it sounds and feels good to you. And then you can bring out the big guns and start doing some crazy stuff with your processing. Like at this point with the drums, I am looking to add a little bit more beef to the drum kit. I'm missing some of the bottom end, so I'd probably do a little bit more EQing on the kick drums, or maybe a little bit more EQing, a little bit more parallel processing with some distortion. Um, maybe and do some master bus processing to just fatten the drums up, glue them a little bit more. And that's it. I'm in a place where I can like immediately start thinking about those things. My next ideas are coming to me. So try to get to a place like that where where the next idea is coming to you and you're happy with what works, what is working now. Not everything you do has to sound like a Grammy winning record. It's all an iterative process. So that's it for today. I hope I'm not disappointing you with getting into the rest of the mix, but I do want you to check this out. I do want you to get back to me and let me know if that answered some questions for you. And with the next class, which I could do over the weekend, really, is I will jump into further like sort of massaging the drums into a much more polished place, and then get into some mix philosophy for the rest of the instruments. Yeah. Okay. Have a good one, man.